Hi everyone, this is Natalie Ellis with Ask the Therapist. I'm Natalie Ellis. I am a licensed professional counselor in the Decatur, Georgia area. And today our topic is about the importance of healing. And we're specifically going to talk about emotional healing. And I thought this was an important topic because, inevitably with all my clients, a lot of the reason why they come to see me is there's some hurt or there's some wound or some injury that has happened in their lives that requires some form of healing. So oftentimes people seek a therapist or come to my office because there's healing that needs to happen. And healing can take place at different levels because there's different layers and levels of hurts that may occur. So I wanted to kind of talk about that. We're going to talk about emotional healing, and I have my notes here, so I'm going to look down a few times. My notes, okay? So when we talk about healing, okay, the definition of healing is the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again after a wound or an injury. Okay? Healing is the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again after a wound or injury. So obviously, there's all forms of healing. Emotional healing, which is specifically what we're going to talk about. There's physical healing. There's all kinds of healings that individuals go through, that all kinds of hurt and injuries that individuals go through that requires different forms of healing. Okay, and so we are going to talk about emotional healing. And the definition of emotional healing is a process of becoming healthy again after you have been hurt emotionally, which can be from a physical injury, which can be from a psychological injury, a mental injury, emotional injury, all those kind of injuries that may occur, and that now there's a wound that needs to be healed. Okay? So, what are some forms of injuries out there? Okay, so as we know, injuries does have a long-lasting effect on people. And injuries can be both visible and invisible. So they leave invisible scars or visible scars, right? And in those scars, sometimes, especially the invisible ones, which is where the emotional part happens. Sometimes when we experience emotional hurt and pain, because people don't see it, it's often dismissed and often not taken seriously, okay? But again, as we know, and I'm sure a lot of individuals out there know, and I know for a lot of my clients, a lot of those hurt and pain that's occurred in their lives do pile up. And they pile up, and after a while, it becomes it does to feel like a burden. It becomes a heavy load that they're carrying. Okay, so although it's an invisible scar or invisible mark, it still does impact us. Okay? And those scars or marks may show up in the way that we act, in our thinking patterns, in the way that we think about things, our emotional patterns, and also in our relationship, okay, in our relationships. And so the wounds that has occurred and the hurts that we're feeling does impact us, and the scars that they leave impact the way we think, act, and feel, and interact with others. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about are ways to, or steps, just things to be aware of in the process of emotional healing. And again, these are the things that I talk about with my clients. So I'm going to just specifically touch on 5 things to begin the process of emotional healing. And I will say in all these processes, it may be best to seek a therapist, seek out someone who is trained in working with trauma, with depression, with anxiety, because again, when we experience wounds and hurt and injuries that happen to us, it often leaves us feeling all kinds of emotions, right? And so the emotions that come up for a lot of people are depression. A lot of people have anxiety, depression, anxiety, anger. Anger is a big one. So the thing about anger, and the way that I've defined anger from the research that I have, anger is a is a surface emotion. Imagine you have an iceberg, right? And anger is what we see at the tip of an iceberg. So when someone is irritable, when they're angry, when they're lashing out, this is what we see. And oftentimes what we see in everybody, right, there's much more to the story. There's a lot of things underneath all that. So even in the anger that we see that's being projected out, that we're seeing, there's usually a lot of other emotions going on. So many times anger is what we see, the irritability, the lashing out, but there's usually other things going on under there. So people have, like I said, depression, anxiety, there's hurt, there's pain, there's disappointments, there's rejection, there's abandonment, there's feeling neglected, feeling lonely. All those are different emotions that an individual may have that's kind of has become overwhelmed and has kind of taken over. Okay? And when we've experienced these different levels of injuries, it creates all these type of emotional wounds, and we have to do something with that. And it's important to heal. And one of the things that that I've read and that I've seen is healing is about reclaiming yourself and reclaiming your power. Oftentimes when we are hurting, when we are burdened with all of our emotional hurt and wounds and pain, we often don't feel in control of our lives as a result of all the hurt and pain that we have. We oftentimes don't feel in control. And so how do we reclaim our lives back? How do we gain some control over our lives? And to do that, we have to release all that pain and hurt. And so the process of emotional healing, it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something, hey, say hi. Say hi. I'm not sure who. Everybody showed up to say hi to everybody. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. So we're talking about emotional healing. Just to recap, just talked about what emotional healing is and the process and what that means. So emotional healing is a process of becoming healthy again after you've been hurt. And again, the hurt can occur a physical injury, an emotional injury, a psychological injury, and those hurt can leave scars, whether it's visible scars or invisible scars. And so, and all this with our wounds and how we react in terms of our behavior patterns, emotional patterns, and our relationship patterns, and our thinking patterns, some of these things can be conscious and very unconscious. Oftentimes when people come to my office and we start processing the things that they have going on, a lot of things starts coming to the light. They weren't aware of a lot of the things that was going on with them. We just get in a habit of being. We just, our patterns and habits, we just kind of do, and we're just kind of living, and we're just in our lives. But then when we start to do the work, it forces us to take a pause, to pay attention to the things we're doing, and to become more mindful and intentional with what's going on with us. And so that helps bring the unconscious to the conscious. And so in order to begin the emotional healing process, we do have to bring the unconscious to the conscious mind. All right? And so in order to do that, and the steps that it takes to do that is first to recognize and acknowledge that there is a wound or that you've been hurt, right? Recognize and acknowledge that there is a wound. Oftentimes, again, we go through life, we experience different things, good, bad, or indifferent, and even in the hurt that we've experienced, we sometimes just push it aside. We dismiss it. We don't acknowledge it. We don't want to cause problems. We don't want no drama, or we avoid conflict for whatever reasons. We just let's just kind of not deal with it. We push it aside, and in the pushing it aside, we don't give it value, right? Which at some point we have to recognize how much value we're giving to it, and that it needs value in order for us to let it go. Right? We first have to recognize, somebody did hurt my feelings. This situation happened, or this situation really created harm to me, or it really put me in a not so good situation. And rather than dismissing it or just kind of pretending, it's going to be okay, and not putting words to whatever that thing is, to whatever that emotion is, it just kind of minimizes it and just kind of keeps it kind of stirring. Okay? So it's important to recognize and acknowledge that there is a wound and that there is a hurt that needs to be dealt with. The second thing would be confronting your wound and your pain by willing to sit in it. So the other thing too, because sometimes the hurt is painful, when we experience something, oftentimes we want to push it aside because, you know what, it's too much. Or it's too much it's too painful, or it hurts too much, or the emotion creates too much distress. And because of all that, we want to push it aside. But part, again, of the healing is to allow ourselves to sit in it, to recognize, yes, I've been hurt, and to recognize, oh my God, it doesn't feel so good, and to kind of sit in it, right? And so sitting in it, to acknowledge it and to verbalize what it is. And that's very uncomfortable. And oftentimes with clients, yes, all that becomes very uncomfortable with clients because I'm asking them, when we start dealing with their past hurts and the things going on with them, we're asking to talk about the most uncomfortable, the most hurtful, the thing that, you know what, this is not something I should be saying out loud. And I often have clients who say that, you know what, you're the first person I say this to. And they whisper the thing because it's something, you know what, it's so painful or so hurtful, right? But in the acknowledgement or saying it out loud is the process of healing. Sitting in it will make you depressed, and it can make you depressed, right? And so recognizing how do we sit in it to get to a place of healing, right? And so, because yes, we can't sit in something so long without figuring out some type of resolution to it, right? But oftentimes when there's things in our lives that's often unresolved, it's going to keep coming back. And so how do we find resolution to it? How do we get to a place that we could deal with it, right? And so yes, so and to some extent too, there are some things that's happened in our lives that does create sadness and depression, and acknowledging that too. And then what do we do about that? And then what, right? And so like I had a young man just last week who, because he's had pain and hurt that's happened in his life when he was about 11 or 12, unconsciously his mission became, I'm only going to be happy. Only happiness. So that's all he tells people whenever people are uncomfortable or in distress around him or have other emotions outside of happy, he tells them just be happy, and he walks away. So there's no healing in just being in a space of, I don't want to say pretending just to be happy, when there's something that is painful here. And how do we recognize it hurts and acknowledge that, right? And so, and it's and creating the balance and all this stuff too, right? Because we don't want to stay in a state of depression, because that's not okay too, and that's not healthy. But again, there are situations that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be sad about it and allow yourself the time to grieve it, which is where the next step is. The next step is identifying the loss, right? And so when we experience an injury, a hurt, a wound that happened to us, whether it's physical or emotional, there's a loss that occurs, right? So whether the loss is a loss of safety, a loss of security, a loss of self, loss of trust, all these different things may happen. The loss occurs because of whatever that injury is, and we have to acknowledge that there is a loss, right? And with losses, we have to allow ourselves to grieve, because we have to grieve those losses. That's no longer what it used to be, is no longer there as a result of this injury and this wound. And so it's okay to be sad about that. And then how do we move on? Because that is the other piece to all of that too. It's recognizing it, being in it, and then how do we move forward, right? And so it's important to also move forward, but it's hard to move forward when everything is just, you know what, I'm just gonna push it all in here and just leave it there, because we carry it, right? It started off like, let's say, started off really small like this, and then, you know, more things happen in life, and then now we're carrying it something else, and then the more we experience life, guess what? this gets bigger and bigger, and then we find ourselves carrying a whole lot more. And so, and that becomes even more detrimental, which makes, again, that depression sometimes just gets bigger and bigger too, because now there's added layers of that wound that's just never been dealt with, versus confronting it, challenging it, acknowledging it, and dealing with it all in the moments that it's happening as much as we can, right? And so the other thing is, so we got to grieve the loss, and part of the grieving process is, so there's 5 stages of grief. So the first stage is denial. So oftentimes when something happened, even when somebody hurt our feelings, sometimes depending on who it is, like, did that just happen? We just can't believe it's happened, So denial, and then it's like, oh man. Then there's anger. Bargaining is a stage where we sometimes take on the guilt. Well, maybe if I did something different, then it wouldn't have happened, right? That's bargaining, and then we have depression is a part of the stages of grief, and then an acceptance, right? And so, again, when we've experienced an emotional hurt, part of the healing process is to grieve, right? Because a loss has occurred because of that injury, all right? The fourth thing I would say is to face the individuals or situations that may have caused the wound. Sometimes we face them directly and sometimes indirectly. With a lot of my clients, I have them write letters to individuals or situations that may have hurt them, where they're able to, in the letter, really speak their piece, because part of facing is to be able to speak your piece. Oftentimes, again, we may have an injury that occurs, and here we are left with all this, and we never have an opportunity to speak our mind, to say what we need to say to the person, or to challenge the situation. I have an individual who was laid off from work, and part of the way that she was trying to, because she didn't understand what happened, and a lot of things were done wrong to her, and she needed to speak her piece. So she challenged it. She took them to court because she needed to say something to the individuals that fired her. And if we can have an opportunity to do that, definitely do that. And those are different ways to do that. So with a lot of my clients, sometimes they can go to that person individually, and sometimes they're unable to. Sometimes the person who's hurt us is someone who has passed away. Sometimes it's a parent. And I have situations with clients where they don't want to create more friction with the parent. But the thing still needs to be said. And so sometimes, again, we write letters, and in writing letters, we pretend the individual's in the room, or and they read the letter to the individual as a way, again, to get it out. Because at the end of the day, it's not really about the individual. It's not about the other person, right? You speaking your piece is an opportunity, because in the moment the injury was occurring, or after it occurred, a loss of control. So that's another loss that occurs. Sometimes as a result, there's loss of control. And part of reclaiming your power is to be able to say, hey, this was hurtful. This was not okay. Whatever it is you need to say, and having an opportunity to say it. And it doesn't matter how long the injury occurred. It amazes me how, again, even adults, when they've had childhood adversities, and the pain that they've experienced as a result of that, how they still need to confront whomever from that past. So although as an adult, intellectually, they understand, potentially, oh, I understand why my mother was never around. I know she had to work. I understand that now. She had she had things to do. I understand that, right? But again, the little child who is wounded as a result of loneliness, who's wounded as a result of feeling rejected, who is wounded as a result of feeling abandoned, did not necessarily understand that. They just accrued the wound. The wound is all that they knew at that time. And so, as a child, the wounds that we collect affects us. Our upbringing affects our behaviors, our patterns, our thinking and our relationships. It affects us. Even though as we get older, we start making sense of it. It makes sense, but the wound already occurred. The damage or the injury has already occurred, right? So being able to face the individual or directly or indirectly, or the situation. Sometimes it's a situation that may have caused an injury, right? And the last thing I would say is seek counseling, right? And so for some individual, when the emotional wound or injury is so overwhelming, and it creates situations of significant depression, where it feels as if you're unable to manage it, then it's important to seek counseling, to seek the help from a professional that's able to help you work through the pain and hurt that you're going through. I would strongly recommend that, because again, as you go through these things, these processes, a lot of things will come up. For a lot of clients, one of the things I tell them, things may get a little worse before they get a little better, right? Because once we have things happen and we've closed and shut, we've put it in a box and we've shut the box and we put the box away, it's good and protected in that box. It's shut away. Now, but the thing is, it's shut away, but it's still impacting everything. It's impacting us significantly because, first of all, this box is starting to get heavy too, right? And so now, when clients come, they're coming with the box at hand. They don't know that. And so what I tell them is, I need the box. We're going to have to open up the box, right? And so that's not going to be easy. And it's not easy. It's going to open up a lot of wounds. It's going to open up a lot of things. But that's definitely the process to healing. And so I strongly recommend seeking a counselor to assist with that process. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, just to recap, I said 5 things in regards to steps to emotional healing. Recognize and acknowledge that there is that you are wounded and that you are hurt. So recognize that. Recognize and acknowledge that. Confront your wound and your pain by sitting in it and recognizing and verbalizing, yes, I am in pain. I am wounded. Okay? And allowing you to feel it. Right? The third thing is identify the losses, the loss that has occurred as a result of the injury and the wound, right? And so identify those losses. The fourth thing, face the individuals or situations that may have created the injury, whether it's directly or indirectly. And the fifth thing is to seek counseling. In doing all that, and it's still overwhelming, definitely seek counseling, or even in the beginning process, depending on how much there is going on, seeking counseling from the beginning. And these are some steps that the therapist can assist you with. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. Again, this is Nathalie Ellis with Ask the Therapist. Hopefully you guys found this helpful, and please comment if you have any questions. Contact me. Again, I'm a licensed professional counselor in the Decatur, Georgia area, and looking forward to Ask the Therapist next week. Hope to see you there. Thank you.